Hey, my little sinners and saints. Today we got another crime case, true crime. This one's going to be a little bit longer, and hopefully by tomorrow I will be doing videos out of my new office. So I hope. Okay, let's get into it, people. Okay, I mixed two songs with that one. I think that's why there's a little bit of like stuttering going on. I am the dark side. My name is Jennifer. And dark side represents the dark side of forensic psychology. I know a lot of people have misconception about what the dark side means. I'm not a Star Wars fan, and I listened to The Wall, whatever the hell it was, back whenever I was younger, but that's not what it stands for. Okay, this is a case about Megan Carr and Cherish DeSantis. Whenever I was researching this, I thought that I would save it for a time of year when many of us can relate to wanting to get away for a little fun in the sun during spring break. Um, let's get into the case. I want to say I'm always thankful for you joining me. And all the support that you give me. I'm sure you're aware um, of how important it is to hit the like button, share, do whatever. But just want to say thank you. Okay, this case is beginning in Thomasville, Georgia, in the spring of 1992, where two best friends are in their junior year of high school at Thomasville High. Megan Carr and Cherish DeSantis They're probably destined to be best friends because they were born only one day apart in 1975. They had been lifelong friends since childhood and were inseparable. Cherish followed Megan everywhere that they went. They're always together. Excuse me. And Cherish was born August 29th, 1975. And Megan was born, I think, August 30th, 1975. Georgia, um, Cherish's dad, Peter Angel DeSantis Jr., noticed Pete and Hazel Stapleton DeSantis, who went by the nickname Dot Cherish, were born with beautiful natural red hair, which became a very prominent feature about her throughout her life. And her best friend, Megan Marie Carr, was born, like I said, just one day after her on August 30th, 1975, also in Thomasville, Georgia, to John Clark Carr and Shirley Singletary Carr. She had one older brother, John Clark Jr., who was 6 years older than her. In Thomasville, Georgia, well, let me tell you about this place. The population there was about 17,000 in 1992. It was kind of a little tiny red dot on the map. And about 35 miles away from Florida state line, Thomasville is known for one of my favorite flowers. You can call me basic, but the rose. I love roses so much. Thomasville is known as Georgia's Rose City. They showcase nearly 2,000 different blooms at the Rose Show and the festival every year. It's a quaint, unique little town filled with charming boutiques, cafes, and southern hospitality. So, what's it like growing up in a town of Thomasville? Well, it can vary depending upon your status. That's for sure. And both Megan and Cherish's families were very well off. Um, pause right there for a minute. Let's look at some pictures. This is obviously Megan and Cherish. This is them. Um, Megan's dad, John, he owned and operated a well drilling company, and he had been in the which had been in the family since 1940. It is estimated his company made around $2 million a year, so they were definitely living a very comfortable lifestyle. And by 1992, Megan's parents were divorced, though she was living with her mom, Shirley. As for Cherish's dad, he was very well known in Georgia and internationally. Pete DeSantis grew up in Thomasville, as well as he attended Thomas County Central High School. But then he went to graduate from the law school in Atlanta, Georgia, where he obtained his law degree. And after that, Pete got into the tobacco business. This is Pete. He was a world renowned tobacco auctioneer, and he had auctioned tobacco for more than 30 years. He had opened his own DeSantis Auction Company in 1981, an auctioneer training center incorporated, where he actually trained other people on how to become auctioneers. He was a member of the National Auctioneer Association, and Pete had been appointed by numerous governors to the Georgia State Auctioneer Commission, and on a number of occasions he was also named National Auctioneer of the Year in the tobacco industry. I'm gonna stop right there for a minute because people are like, tobacco. Um, you can sell tobacco. I honestly don't know if they still do it today or not, but when I grew up, we grew tomatoes and tobacco, and they'd hang it in the barn, let it dry out, and then sell it. So this is not an unusual thing to me. And I don't know how you feel about this, but this is how he made a living. These types of tobacco auctions are almost a thing in the past. Considered the tobacco industry is now on a decline, and since smokers have become educated about the dangers of cigarette smoking. This is what I'm talking about. People bring in different types of tobacco. They go through. They're like, okay, this is good. It's a good price, and that's just how it goes. They auction on it. And I went to the Marlboro Company in, I think it was Raleigh, Winston-Salem, and they make the cigarettes. It's like one big ass cigarette, and they chop it up. And this was cool. That was actually a fun little school event we did. So as I light a cigarette, but it was still, but it was still a very booming business back in the 80s and in the early 90s. Once Pete had made his significant income, he got into real estate, and he owned many other properties between Georgia and Florida. But his home that the DeSantis family lived in was in Thomasville, where it was a very rural area. It was tucked away from everybody else in its own location called Olive Creek. And it was so private I couldn't even find any information whatsoever about this area. I was able to find a home that would mostly look like it. It's very similar to the DeSantis family, the one they lived in. I'll put up a picture of it on the screen. This is not their home, but it's in the same neighborhood with 4 bedrooms, 4 bath, and over 3,000 square feet, just like the one Cherishes that on. And you can see it's a very nice house and an area that actually, hold on, let's look at it. Let's look at it. Olive Creek. This is a house that's similar. And it actually reminds me of the Murdochs, in the South out, because you would not know that that house was out there. Um, it was in a private neighborhood, rural area. I mean, it was, very private. But it reminds me of the Murdoch family that lived out in Moselle, very private, and the DeSantos family lived on almost 8 acres of land. However, it was only a 15-minute drive from Thomasville High School because they were living in a small town. I am not sure how Cherish and Megan met, probably from going to the same schools, but they did have very similar lifestyles, and they could have met in clubs, like school clubs, um, not bars. They were a part of, I don't know which ones, but um, as kids, they were in high school, and both of them participated in sub devs and Kappa Tri Hi Y. Sub stands for sub debut. This is where all the young ladies come out and debut themselves, that they're eligible. And it's like a socialite thing, rich people. I guess that's why I've never heard of it, because I was never rich, probably never will be. But it stands for sub debut, and this means a woman is not yet a debutante, but on her way to becoming one. And a debutante is a young woman of aristocrat or upper class family who has reached maturity and is a new adult that's presented to the society of men. Yes, it's their formal debut, and considering both girls participated in the elite club as teens, they may have met and similar ones as children. Sub-dubs are basically high school sororities, and its members are very involved in social activities. Many of the girls who participated were very smart, beautiful, well dressed, wealthy, and from of the most well known families in the area. So it's no surprise that Megan and Cherish probably became so close. They participated in the Tri High, as I mentioned earlier, which is part of the YMCA program and has been active with young adults ever since 1850. They have high standards for high school. The Y stands for the Y in YMCA. If you don't know, the YMCA was originally for men. Let me get some pictures going here because apparently I'm behind. Was originally for men. Christian Association, but eventually Tri High Y clubs were later formed for girls, and the Tri was for the purpose of being threefold: create, maintain, and extend to the fullest capacity of one's ability throughout home, school, and the community. High standards of morals. So they definitely wanted to be productive citizens. Oh, um, they wanted to present, like I said, in the home, the school, and the community, high standards of moral characteristics to improvement of brother and sisterhood equality and service in high school. High schools, Megan and Cherish were very popular. They were part of course, the cool kids on campus. They were 16 in 1992. Cherish had a long time serious boyfriend at the time named Alex Hunt, and they were very close. And they were typical teens their age, driving in fast cars, listening to loud music, and getting into a little bit of trouble. But all in all, they were good kids. Megan's mom, Shirley, was a little stricter, maybe because she was raising Megan all on her own, but she would definitely make sure her daughter was in line. But as long as she was getting good grades and doing her chores, Megan was allowed to partake in extracurricular activities, such as her favorite thing of doing and performing with the color guard team. They had choreographed dances and routines for the high school marching band. They usually seen flipping flags in the air, and Cherish was a cheerleader. They were both part of the drama troupe. Together they part of the drama troupe together at Thomasville High School as juniors, and BFFs were attached at the hip. Whenever you saw one, you saw the other. When they would walk down the halls together every day, and the assistant principal, Mr. Andy Jones, would always try to find a way to make them laugh or smile, which wasn't very hard to do. The girls loved to have fun, and they were really looking forward to spring break. Their last day of the school year was Thursday, March 26th and 27th. And it's not the last day of the school year, it's the last day of school because then they would have to come back in, I think August it is. 27th, which was a Friday, was teachers planning day, so they didn't have to go to school 2 days prior to spring break. And then they were off until April. That's how old I am. I forgot. April 6th for spring break. Their first order of business, getting some sun on the beach and not in Thomasville, of course, over the border into Florida. Florida. There's a lot of criminal shit goes on in Florida. Where else is the customary for where it's always customary for Thomasville students to venture over into the border into Tallahassee, Florida, and take one state road, US 98, about 80 miles all the way to the shore. It only took them about 2 hours to drive there, and they had fun doing lots of different things on the way down there. The beach in particular that was popular among teenagers from Thomasville, one that wasn't overrun by tourists. It was called Bald Point. It's an 8 mile stretch of shoreline on Alligator Point Peninsula on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. I know. That sounds alligator infested. I get it. Did you never hear any mention of any alligators? So I think it's just a name. I don't know. I didn't read into that. I hear the word alligator, I'm out. The coast of Gulf of Mexico, and it's part of the Bald Point State Park. As a native Floridian, people say that they have heard of this place. They know where it's at. Um, the when doing these cases and research, because I have learned so much about the park where the beach is located. Um, it's beautiful. The pictures that I've seen of it, it's just gorgeous. This was down, I hope it comes air. Thomasville down into the Bald Point. Let me go back. This is the 8 mile stretch right here. Apparently, there's some sort of bird season. We'll get to it. Scenic areas along the North Florida coast, including coastal marshes, pine flatwoods, and oak thickets. It's also a popular destination for bird and wildlife viewing. And yes, there are alligators there, which is why it's called Alligator Point. Of course. But why bald points? Well, each fall the bald eagles migrate south to this area. Now, when I heard this, I wasn't exactly sure what I would think when someone says that they want to spend the day at the beach. Um, Spend the day at the beach, not really, but the beaches there are very pretty. The park is open from sunrise to sunset, and there's also a picnic area, restrooms, um, boardwalk where you can enjoy all the sights and sound of the marshes as you crisscross the park towards the beach. Let's see what else we got now. I mean, it's beautiful. And then once you get there, it is just water and sand as far as the eye can see. There are some homes in Alligator Point community. It's just outside the park, but they are few and far between. So that was the plan Megan and Cherish had, to set off on Friday morning around 10 o'clock a.m. and spend all day at Alligator Point, then spend the night before together on Thursday night. They spent the night before they were going to go down there, and they were watching movies and having a sleepover. By the time the morning came, they were packing their bags beach bags, bikinis, flip flops to set off to Florida, planning to return home by the evening. A couple of friends had planned to come along, but one of them ended up having to babysit, and the other changed her mind at the last minute. So it was just Megan and Cherish. Megan was driving her black late model Honda, and they made 3 stops along the way, first at a convenience store, maybe to get some snacks and gas, then at the State Line store, where a whole lot of people buy souvenirs, and finally a sandwich shop before arriving at the beach. They got there sometime around noon. Megan parked her car, and the girls set up their beach blankets down on the oh, what would you call it? The sand right before the water so they could get some sun. And they had on their bikinis, turned on the local rock station on their battery operated boombox. As best in the sun together, they were having having a wonderful day, and they wanted to go for a swim. They went in for a swim, come out, and they were trying to get some sun. But that's exactly what they came there for. Not a care in the world, relaxing the day away at the beach. A couple hours later, an off duty police officer from back in Savannah, Georgia, who was on vacation, was strolling down Bald Point Beach with his wife, and he saw the girls laying in the sun, and they made her they made it to where they didn't intrude upon the girls. So they kind of walked widely, around them to give them their privacy. Uh, it's good because other beaches in spring break all the time, people don't care. They're walking on your blankets, they're throwing sand on you, they're pretty rude. It's kind of like it's all for themselves. And that's why people enjoy this beach, is because it's more secluded and you can enjoy yourself. But a little while later, as the couple were walking back down the beach or down the shore, they passed the girls a second time. That's when the officer's wife noticed that the girls hadn't moved at all. They were in the exact same position as they were whenever they had came down, and that was slightly odd. One of the girls was kind of on top of the other one, hence why they had given them the privacy the first time when they went by. It did not appear to look normal like the second time around, and especially when they stared in the direction of the officer. The wife told him to stay there. The officer told his wife to stay there, and he went to investigate. He could tell right away that something definitely wasn't right. He saw blood, and he screamed to his wife to call the police. They're dead. Wow, how horrifying would it be to stumble upon a scene even for an officer like this? It's definitely shocking and not something you would expect to see at the beach, especially in broad daylight, and a beach like this where this was like a family beach, and many of the locals enjoyed the sunset strolls or afternoon picnics with their loved ones, and you don't expect to end up losing your life. So the officer and his wife then rushed to a phone to report what they had seen, and Franklin County Sheriff's Department Warren Rodney Berry was the first to arrive at the scene, and this was at 3 p.m. He was very familiar with Alligator's Point since 1966. He had never witnessed anything like this, and there were no problems with women being attacked there in the area of Roddenberry. He is a native of southern Georgia himself and actually graduated from Thomasville High School, just like the girls. But he wouldn't put together until later, when the pair were identified. He found 2 women lying lifeless in broad daylight, with midday sun now scorching their bodies. He scanned the immediate area, and the radio was still playing rock music, which now seemed very eerie. It created a strange contrast between the tragedy and the carefree atmosphere of this beach. He sees their belongings are still there. Their beach bags were still on the blanket, which were undisturbed. Megan's car keys were right there beside her, within reach. He located their wallets, which contained their IDs, as well as some cash. So robbery definitely didn't seem like it was the motive. Here, the person who did this left the car and cash behind of both girls, and both girls were still wearing the bikinis, which were not tugged on, torn, or any way to show sexual motive, were rolled out. So, what happened to these girls? Megan had a towel over her head, which was soaked with blood, and Cherish was laying on top of her with a gunshot wound to her head. There was a lot of blood pooling around both of the bodies at this point. There didn't seem to be any marks on them. It didn't look like there was a struggle at all. It was as that they were just caught off guard and didn't see it coming. Whosoever Roddenberry coming whatsoever. Roddenberry was able to make a preliminary identification of both of the girls by looking at their IDs and matching them to the bodies. I can't even imagine stumbling upon something like this. He noticed that they were from his hometown, and it got personal for him with it being a small world, that they were from the same tiny southern town that he was from. He began looking around the area as he lined up transport for the girl's remains to be taken back to the medical examiner's office. He wondered if this was done by someone who knew the girls. It didn't seem to make sense that a stranger would do something like this. How would they even know that the girls were here? It appeared that the girls were killed very close in time to one another. The fact that Cherish fell right on top of Megan signified that they were killed back to back. That she didn't have much time to move very far. It seemed like they had been planned, like someone had followed them from back home. But who? Who would want these two teenage girls, dead? Officer Roddenberry called in additional units from Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the FDLE, to search the beach and the surrounding areas as he interviewed beachgoers and locals to see if they had heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. Even though he was in a secluded area of the beach, there were many other families and other cars that were parked nearby, and residents who were close enough that they could have been able to hear or see something. There was one guy who said that he was down there every day on a regular basis to the area, and he said that he heard what he thought was fireworks around 12:30 or so in the afternoon, and that he saw a car driving right nearby, and it was not a car that he is used to seeing. It looked to him like a blue Chevy Nova or something to that effect. He said that the car was long and he wasn't familiar with the style. So I looked up the car, and this is, I know what a Chevy Nova is. And this is what it looked like. Officers went to look in the parking lot area, and that's when they discovered Megan's black car parked in one of the designated spots. The Georgia license plate is apparent. This is the most likely the girl's car, because there probably isn't a lot of Georgia plates there. That the girls came in, but then they saw something odd. There's a car parked directly behind Megan's car, kind of blocking it in so that they couldn't get out. And there was ample spots for the car to be parked. So why would the car be parked right there behind it, of all places? This this car had a man in it. Um, it was a Chevy. It was a Chevy. It was blue. So perhaps the guy in the Chevy, he said that um, they thought it was a Chevy, but as they got closer, I don't think it was. They realized there's someone sitting inside the car. Up to the driver's side, they walked and had him roll down the window. The man was sitting in the car seat, the driver's seat, with his car off and a camera in his lap. So they tell him that he needs to step out of the car. The officers want to know what he's doing there, and the sun's about to go down. And the man's like, I've been here all day taking pictures, hence the camera. And the officers were like, pictures? Pictures of what? And the man said, wildlife. There's a lot of birds in this area. And one of the officers asked if the man saw any people while he was shooting pictures of the birds. The man said, well, yeah, there were a few down there. And one of the officers goes a step further and he said, step further, and he's like, how about some teenage girls? Did you happen to see them? He says, no, I didn't. I don't think so. I can't recall. The guy's demeanor was just off, and so the cop pressed him, and he got defensive, and he said, the worst thing you can do is lie to a police officer. One of the most worst things you can do is get the cop. He started getting passive aggressive with the gentleman in the car, and he made a snarky comment about the guy got a few shots of the bikini clad teenagers in his role of picture, in the role of his pictures. And that's when the dude kind of goes off on him. And he said, I'm not like that. I didn't take any pictures of teenagers dancing on the beach. And it was like, aha moment. Wait a minute. Who said anything about them dancing on the beach? The officers got suspicious, and he's offering up information that had not been provided to him that gives him a reason for his car to be searched. And then they want to bring him down. Oh, he has a gun in the car, and he tells about it. And so at this point, they want to bring him down for a formal interview, even though at this point he's pleading with them that he didn't do anything wrong. And by the time it was getting late, and the Thomasville girls had told their parents they would be back in the evening around dinner time, and Megan told her mom she would have been home for dinner. But now she's wondering where her daughter is, and she hasn't showed up. When Megan didn't show up by 6 o'clock p.m., Shirley decided to call over to Cherish's house to see if they had went over there instead of, coming back home right away. However, the girls were very responsible, so she figured they had probably were out having fun, because when she called, the other parents said that, no, they're not here, and that they were running a little late. And meanwhile, the investigator, John Richards from Thomasville Sheriff's Office, and Agent John Hyman from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations had begun to had notified um, had been notified about Megan and Cherish back in Florida, by Officer Roddenberry. He had started to put together a task force with the other FDLE and a number of other agencies, including the Parks and Wildlife Department and the GBI, as well as the Thomasville Police. Back in Georgia, 2 officers were sent, one to Megan's home and one to Cherish's home, to notify the families about what had happened. It was devastating for both households. It was like losing two daughters since the girls were so very close, and there is no easy way to tell someone that their loved one is never coming home. Unbelievable, and of course, in the midst of all this, time is ticking away, and though the officers try their very best, they're not even trained to give those types of notifications and be sympathetic. They are also they are trained to give those type of notifications and be sympathetic. Sorry. There also is a need to ask questions. Um, that's twofold there. They're they are there to be the bearer of bad news, but they are also there to gather information from the family that may aid in the search of the of Megan's mom. Killer. Megan's mom offered up some details about her daughter, who has spent time most of her time with Megan, was at the DeSantis household all the time, and if she wasn't there with the girls, she went out at Shirley's house to another person she used to spend time with is Cherish and Cherish's boyfriend Alex, who hung out a lot. Shirley said that she would come over the night before, and it was really late. However, she didn't think anything about it. Um, Everyone is a suspect until they get ruled out. And what stumped the detectives was how the killer was able to get so close to the girls without them running away or being a struggle of some kind. So it seemed that maybe the girls knew the killer or even trusted him or felt that there wasn't a threat to them in order for him to be able to walk right up to them without a scream or either one of them trying to run away. Right now, they still have the man that was blocking Megan's car at the gas station, and they are grilling him until he finally admits he's seen the girls. He still says he has nothing to do with the murders because they were alive, and when he passed them on the beach, he even took a polygraph test. Meanwhile, the medical examiner had determined that the girls were both shot twice in the head, close range by a 38 caliber weapon. There was no other signs of injuries or struggling. There was no forced intercourse. The man that they were questioning had a 9 millimeter and passed the polygraph test, so they let him go at that point. By the next morning, the news had spread about the double homicide on the secluded Florida beach. Articles came out in both Florida and in Georgia asking the public for any information that they had in relationship to this crime, as their loved ones and schoolmates were struggling to understand and deal with seemingly senseless murder that still remained a mystery. One classmate that wanted to remain anonymous, she said that she had been down at the same part of the beach before with a friend and was just lying in the sun. And that's probably what Megan and Cherish were doing. And unusual, she said it was so hard to believe that her friend was dead and she was still in shock. And it wouldn't even hit her until she went back to class and the girls weren't there. Um, it hadn't really sunk in. And when something like this happens in a small town, all the locals talk, of course, about news state. Then every news station is out there trying to make the biggest story because what's going on is to sell their papers. I see it all the time, and it's sad but true. If it bleeds, it leads. So, of course, many of the stories and rumors are spreading, and not all people were sympathetic. There was one old lady that lived in Alligator Point, and she was interviewed, and she had only been living there for 2 weeks, but was kind of a victim blaming. Um, and not only did she portray Alligator Point as a rough area, she said anyone who went down there without a man, a gun, or a dog was just stupid, as though they were asking for trouble. but she didn't have any useful information to provide to police. Cherish and Megan weren't doing anything stupid. These were just two girls that had went on spring break and trying to enjoy themselves. And unfortunately, they were the victims of extremely unfortunate situation that was completely out of their control. No matter, excuse me, no matter what the precautions they have took, they would have never anticipated this tragedy that unfolded in Clayton Taft. Clayton Taft was interviewed by police. He was the owner of the Point Lounge in Alligator Point.
This hallway here will be hallway 2 again, where more residents were. We have a doll here that there is a resident, and she would roll her wheelchair up and down the hallway, and she liked that. So she liked playing with that. I was told that they interact with bells, they interact with the dolls, they like things that light up, they like noise. And I figured it's mainly because when they were doing their physical therapy and stuff to try to help them. So they do like that. Hallway 3, which is also known as Red Hallway. And this is where the male nurse had passed away. I'll hear a lot of activity from this hallway. You'll hear things fall, like something's being thrown or something. Belonged to the gentleman that used to pick up the pop cans. This was his room. And I was told that when he was working on it, that he passed away of a heart attack. This is the nurse's station where Ed, the former nurse, passed away again. This is the break room. Still got the lockers for the people that worked here.
What's that? Yeah, so we sort of walk out.
So there's some pictures. Started showing up in the news. And that's the beach. Um, Clayton Taft was interviewed by police. He was the owner of, excuse me, he was the owner of Point Lounge and Alligator Point. It was just down the road from where the girls were found. He was very upset with the way that people were describing this area because this was bad for business. The murder is bad for his business and he relies on customers feeling safe. He said that this was the first time anything like this had ever happened, and he also added that about 5 other guys were adding a sun deck to his business that Friday afternoon, and they were doing a lot of hammering, so they didn't hear a thing, and they were not aware of anything that had gone wrong. So law enforcement showed up to take a statement from him. Um, he did say that the part of the beach where the girls were found was way more secluded than other area that faces the east across the Appalachian Bay, and that is not easy to find if you're not looking for it. You don't, you do not know where the sign to look for the signs. You will drive right past it on the narrow country road that winds through the pines. So no one understood how anyone how it would randomly drove down there through the road and somehow found that particular area of beach and gunned the two girls down like this. It just didn't seem to make sense. And that's why the officers and Thomas spell, felt focused their attention on Alex Hunt, Cherish's boyfriend. They pay him a visit, and of course, he's absolutely distraught over the news that his girlfriend and her best friend, two people that were very close, that he had lost. The officers back down. They didn't want to know. They wanted to know why he was over at Megan's house really late the night before. He tells the officers, "I was just over there to see my girlfriend," and ask him, "Oh, did your parents know where you were? Did your parents know where you're going?" He's like, "No, but they wouldn't have cared anyway. It's spring break." As they pressed him about the conversations he had with the girls, they asked him if he knew anything about the beach and if he had made any plans to meet them down there. He said that he didn't talk to them about anything like that night before and that he had nothing to do with their murders. But that's when he said something that catches the officers off guard. He tells them that he doesn't own a gun anyway. The thing is, no one had mentioned a gun. Again, someone didn't mention something to him or anyone else. But of course, he could have read it or heard it in the news. Um, and it didn't really it raised a red flag. But Alex's alibi, to which he replied that he was working at the plant where he worked in town, and the employers he gave the employers information. Investigator Rick does confirm that Alex was at work that day, and the girls were killed. So was checked off their list. Um, the rumors didn't stop though, even though he was cleared. So people were making up their own version of events, and this was before social media. So now there's a common occurrence. So much speculation before the investigators could even do their job. Soon enough, false information was spread that authorities had found the murder weapon, but that wasn't true. No weapon had been found, and the only reason that they knew the caliber of the weapon was due to the autopsies when they found the actual bullets. The story got a lot of coverage in the news, and it could have been because the girls were young, but it was most likely because of Pete Santos and his connected with the governor of Georgia. At the time of the Zell Miller, at the time Zell Miller was speaking about what had happened, and he was asking the public to come forward and offer $2,000 reward for any information that could lead the killer of um, to the killer, and there were hundreds of calls coming in, and investigators had a lot more interviews to conduct. One person came forward and talked about the area that the girls were in used to be a nude beach, and it was true. And not only that the police had been out there a few times recently for calls about women sunbathing topless, but again, there was an attempt on explaining why the girls were targeted. But both girls were wearing bikinis, and there were no signs of crime. There was no sexual motivation seen or discovered. There was just another piece of information that seemed pretty useless. I mean, why would that lead to the murder anyway? Would someone be so upset that they would turn a gun on them for being topless on the beach? It just didn't seem to make sense. It seemed a little bit more like victim blaming yet again. By Monday, March 30th, just a couple of days after the girls were found deceased on the beach together, they were buried in separate funerals. This is the cemetery where they were buried. That's Megan. And that's Cherish. Um, their mothers had went to say their final goodbyes. Megan's mother described her daughters as strong willed, outspoken. Cherish's father said his daughter was sweet and funny, and she loved to make other people laugh. Both girls were so very loved by their friends and families, and their loss was deeply felt throughout the entire community. Megan and Cherish has family members and friends that were confused and upset by the way that this investigation was going. How could this happen in the community of Thomasville? They were devastated, and they wanted answers, and they wanted to know why two young girls were targeted and killed, while someone would commit such a horrific act of violence. By the time school started up again, it seemed so real for both girls. Empty seats in class, the principal, Jerry, shuddered, commented that a few days of spring break that were still left between the murders and the students coming back did provide somewhat of a cushion, but this sadness was evident on the campus. Some of the students did not or did interviews, and I have one of those that I thought was telling about the way these students felt about Megan. She was 17. Um, Her friend was Lakeisha Tillman. She was a classmate of Megan. She said that she always saw the two childhood friends, Megan and Cherish, teasing one another and walking down the hall. Megan had a heavy Southern accent, Lakeisha said. She had a really hard time dealing with her absence. She was crying and others were crying too. And a group of students actually got up and left class to go get counseling with the guidance department. She also added that most people think Megan and Cherish must have told someone that they were going down there and they were followed to Alligator Point. She said that she's not scared, but she wants to know who did this. Roddenberry know from his interview that was in common with the girls, like what's the connection? And the knowledge of the girls that were headed down there knew that they had confirmed whether they knew the killer or not. They could have, that's all that he could tell the public at this point, and still had no leads. I keep wondering if he had something to do with Cherish's father's tobacco business. Could there be someone upset with him and the business dealing, like a deal going wrong, or um, something like that along those lines, where they wanted to take it out on his daughter? The FDLA, the FDLE, and the GBI worked hard for weeks to solve the girls' murders, but they found no leads to pursue Megan and Cherish's murders. Mystified, everyone involved in this case that seemed to be no motive for the crime, and the lack of evidence made it extremely difficult for the police to determine who was responsible. Even the seasoned investigators were baffled. The pressure from the community was building, like it usually does in a small community, but the local Thomasville could police could not do anything much in Florida. With leading the case, they had one clue, and that was the blue Chevy Nova. Back then, Georgia did not have a vehicle database that connected car colors to owners, but Florida did. So that is where they put their focus. They pulled up every record of anyone in the area who registered a blue vehicle with the state of Florida. Of course, with the emphasis on any resident that had a vehicle similar to an older model blue Chevy Nova. And they sent out agents to investigate. They went door to door. It was a huge task for these investigators. They weren't even sleeping. They were obsessing, trying to track down every single car they could possibly match this description. And they would get a hit before, they would get a hit here and there. someone would seem suspicious and they would track them down. They lived right across the street from one of the girls back in Thomasville that drove a similar car but had an alibi. Another person of interest came up on the radar. It was a guy who was lingering around the crime scene. When the officers asked him for his identification, the man handed them the Department of Corrections identification card, like a prison card. This was a 28-year-old man who had a long criminal record, over 13 arrests, and he had just recently been released from state prison again. It seemed like a very promising lead, but like all the others, it ended up having nothing to do with the crime and more speculation swirling around. Some people believe that the girls had been caught up in a drug smuggling operation. Yeah, that there were smuggling drugs into the secluded part. They thought that they were either smuggling drugs into this area or they were there and people were smuggling drugs in and they killed them because they witnessed something. The girls didn't expect anyone to be there and shot them dead since they would have been witnesses. But after looking into this theory, there were no boats seen. There were no evidence that a boat came up on the shore. No one saw anything, so they ruled it out and moved on to the next. But this case looked like it was going to be unsolved until a very strange phone call came into Franklin County Sheriff's Office in Tallahassee, Florida. A woman was on the other line and she was telling the investigators that she knew who shot the girls because she was there when it happened. So, of course, they are dialed into what this woman is saying, reigniting their hope that they are going to find out the killer and bring justice and closure to the girls' case, and for the families. The caller says the man is named Sammy Hayes and he lives about 16 minutes away from the beach, but she wouldn't give him any more information. And when they asked, she hung up and they tried to track the phone number back that she was calling from. They were determined that it was a payphone, but the woman had just implicated herself in a crime, being at the scene of the crime, so really wanted to know who she was. But there was no luck. However, they tracked down a guy named Sammy Haynes that called them. They called the number associated with the local man, and his father answers the phone. He says, "Oh, you're looking for my son, Sammy? Yeah, he's at work at construction in Atlanta, Georgia, and he's gone at the moment in Atlanta." Well, that's a connection right there that looks like it might work out because he was in Georgia. So, could he have known the girls, seen them driving to Florida the day before, followed them down, maybe, walked down to the beach and killed them? They go to all the local establishments and see if anybody knows this man or ever heard of him before, or even interacted with someone that might match this guy's description. So they go out to the bar. They are that area called the Point Lounge, whose owner, Clayton Taft, had already been interviewed. We heard from him before. Will, a bartender, comes forward and says that she recalls something very odd that happened the day of the murders. A weird interaction with the Patreon. He comes in right away, he comes in right when they opened. He orders a Bloody Mary, but he wasn't completely set up. She felt bad because she was trying to get things in order. The bar wasn't completely set up, so she was trying to get it together. His In order to make his drink, and there was a delay, so she told him, "You know what? That'll be on the house. Don't worry about it." Um, but no, he insisted on paying for it. Doesn't really seem like that's odd, but it's better to keep the money, and it'll be the first. And the last time I come in here, he told her to keep the money because it's going to be the first and last time that I come in here and just give her the creeps. Maybe it was innocent, though maybe he was just referring to a bad service. Like, you better keep what you can because you aren't getting my customer. You're not getting my money again. That's the type of thing that was there for about 40 minutes is how long he stayed. Um, but this would have put him in the area of the girls who were murdered about an hour before they were found. And it's frustrating because you get what you think is a lead and then they investigate because you have to. And then sometimes without cameras or anything else to go on, it goes to nowhere. But the questions linger. And before they can really look into the Sammy Hayes guy, he calls into the station. He's still out in Atlanta, but expected to be back that night. So he agrees to come in the next morning and speak with them. He does and says that 6 hours away, and he he was at the time of the murders as well, but thinks that he could have driven by. He wasn't there at the time of the murders, but he could have driven by there. And back insists that no one's giving you false information about me, and someone's giving false information about him. Someone's probably trying to get back at him, which is probably his ex-wife, maybe his ex-wife's sister Linda. That sounds so cultivated. But he said, check my alibi. I'm telling you the truth. She's made this crap up about me. She's trying to get back at me for something I did, and she didn't like it. This sounds super extreme. This man was telling the truth and tracked down Linda, and sure enough, this was her way of getting revenge on him for not treating her sister right. I mean, that's a crime in itself to interfere with a criminal investigation. She could have been arrested, but right now they had bigger fish to fry. Most important things to worry about are, besides Sammy's alibi checked out, so they checked him off the list. But due to a false tip, detectives spent their precious time and hours of the day verifying it, that rather than investigating leads that had valuable to, could have been more important and actually have been valuable leads. They also spent money on this. Energy was wasted. It also resulted in missed opportunities to solve the case, and it was tough. This case was all anyone was talking about from Florida to Georgia. It was like the wounds couldn't heal, especially because there was no one in custody. There were locals that would call into the police stations, and if the investigators on the case answered, they would go off on them. They would tell them, all, um, they would yell at them, they would tell them off. Why ain't you out on the streets? There's a killer out there. Why are you not working this case nonstop? Still, if the next thing didn't happen, they may have never solved the case, no matter how hard they worked on it. Okay, let's get some. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this is the car that the murderer drove. This is a Nova. They look very similar. Friday, May 15th, around 10 a.m., a call came in to the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, a familiar type of call. On the other line was a woman from Tallahassee who said she knew who killed Megan and Cherish. She said that it was her ex-boyfriend. Of course, the police weren't going to get their hopes up again. This could just be another jilted ex trying to get revenge or their 15 minutes of fame. So they asked her why she felt that her ex had killed the girls. And she said because he had told her he did, and he had just called that evening before and sounded really odd, like he wasn't right. There was something going on, and he confessed to the killing of the girls at Alligator Point. They asked her, "What's your ex's name?" And she said, "Robert Neil Rodriguez." And get this, it sounded familiar to one of the investigators as he looks down the list of people that he had already spoken to. It sounded familiar to one of the investigators. He looks down the list of people he'd already spoken to, and the man's name had been crossed off as not being a suspect. The reason that he was on the list in the first place was because that he knew he had a blue vehicle, so they asked his ex, did he drive a blue Chevy Nova? And she said no, he drives a blue 1979 Plymouth Volunteer. These cars are very similar in the way that they look. They're almost identical. I'm not a, well, I am a car person, but it's hard to tell them apart. And the ex-girlfriend couldn't provide much more information. She said that there's no idea where he was now, but he was leaving town, and he had a gun. The last place that she knew he was living was with his mother at 520 East College Avenue in Tallahassee, Florida. He lived about an hour away from Alligator Point, so so was this really the man responsible for the murders? What would he be doing in the area? But now that they had this man's name and the style of car that he drove, they put out a bulletin across the entire country, and they pulled up his information and they cross-checked it with what the man was said when he had been on the telephone interview with them just a couple of weeks back. And in the end of April, early May, they had contacted him in reference to a blue vehicle being registered in the state of Florida. Now, as soon as they search his name in the database, they're stunned at the results because Robert is a former police officer from Portland, Oregon. He was hired in March 1975, but he resigned just 2 years later. Could this be one of their own that had committed such a heartless crime? They called over to Portland PD and retrieved Robert's personal file. They wanted to find out as much information as they could on this man and as possible could while they were making these calls and looking at his files. They also were sending a few officers out to his last known address. No one's there. So they knock on the neighbor's door, and one of the neighbors said Robert left his apartment around May 2nd or May 3rd. They weren't sure, but they didn't mention that they did mention that he was very depressed since his mother, Bradley Irene Rodriguez, had died on Easter morning. Wow, this was all too much. They felt like they were getting somewhere. However, they had done this before and it ended up being nothing, being a not being a viable lead. By the time he left, he did not, by the time he left, did kind of match up with the time frame, and they had called him in for an interview, and they were asking him about his car and going out to speak with him. I want to tell you what was gathered from Robert's personal file from the Portland PD. He was born on Air Force Base in Southwest Florida in 1950. He was currently 42 years old. He was a father with 22-year-old Air Force veteran, and his family traveled a lot, relocated several times while Robert was growing up. which forced him to move from school to school and attended at least several different schools from Florida, Georgia, Alabama during his childhood. In 1968, he graduated high school in Fort Walton and Beach, Florida, which was about 2.5 hours away from Tallahassee. Then enrolled at Okaloosa Walton Junior College before transferring out to Brigham Young University in Utah. Now, this is a very well known Mormon university, and his personal file stated that he did become a Mormon while attending the school, and he spent the next 2 years doing Mormon missionary work out in Guatemala. And then he went back to Utah to graduate with a degree in law enforcement from Brigham Young. He was hired by the Portland Police Department thereafter until he resigned on good terms, according to his supervisor, Sergeant Derek Foxworth of the Portland PD. It was noted that Robert had no disciplinary actions or anything like that, that he moved to Tallahassee in 1978, where he eventually tried to go back to school at Florida State University. He wanted to get a different career, but at the time, they just weren't really working out for him. And he spent the next few years between jobs and trying to get back to graduate school. He was currently working as a sign painter and as a janitor. He was also a member of the Unity Christian Church, where he would go regularly, give Sunday morning sermons. Robert had been married to a woman named Virginia Blair from 1981 to 1985, but according to her, the marriage ended because Robert was a drug addict. She said that her knowledge of his drug addiction at the time was minimal, and she was naive and believed that he was going to, and he assured her that he would seek treatment. But when she came to the realization that he wasn't going to, she ended the relationship. And as I mentioned, he attended FSU, Florida State University, as a graduate student studying political science, but he never obtained a degree. In addition to painting and working as a janitor, Robert held several jobs over the years. He was a car salesman. He delivered newspapers for the Tallahassee Democrat from 1985 to 1988 before going into bankruptcy in 1999. Where Robert now, that's what authorities want to know. And that's what they have to wait too long for their next lead. Just 8 hours later, around 6 p.m., the phone rang again at the Franklin County station. This time it was a man's voice on the other end, and he identified himself as Robert Neil Rodriguez, the man whose ex-girlfriend had called 8 hours earlier and said he confessed to her for the double homicide at Alligator Point. Being a former police officer, he offered up his driver's license number as proof that he was who he said he was. This is when the entire case gets crazier to me. It is something that I have never heard of happening before in any of my other cases. That is why it is so interesting to me. So much he confessed to the officer that he was the killer, and just like that, he admits it. And of course, they wanted to know where he is, and he tells them he's at a payphone, Interstate I-40 in New Mexico, and he had been traveling for days from Florida to the location that he was at the moment. They began the processing of getting a warrant to search Robert's Tallahassee apartment. They also put a statewide bulletin with the suspect's description. Is 42 years old, 5'8" tall, 155, and balding. But he had some dark brown and gray hair on the sides of his head, with neatly trimmed gray and black beard and mustache. He was said to be driving a dark blue 1979 Plymouth Vulture with a Florida tag HWN05G. Just by the way the man was speaking, he seemed to be distraught, as though he was not in a very good state of mind. And authorities believe that he could be at risk for taking his own life. So they hurry up and got the information out and put the picture out of him to the media so that they could catch him. And they want him brought in live, of course. They were worried that if he saw himself in the media, it would set him off. Someone else set someone else off, and they would end up getting justice with their own hands. Robert provided investigators with information that only the killer would know, things that were not published to the media, like the fact that the towel over Megan's face and other details as well. The detectives told him to turn himself in, that he could help him, but Robert was like, "There's no way you can help me, and I'm not going to prison." It's a known fact that prison can be a very difficult place for police officers, as inmates, in some cases, officers that face incarceration are placed in protective custody. There was sexual deviance and in prison's medical facility because of the danger they face behind bars. They're targets. So instead of turning himself in, Robert told the detective that he was on his way to the Grand Canyon, where he was going to take matters into his own hands, of course. They tried to talk him out of it and they tried to negotiate with him, but he said it's too late before he had hung up. The detectives knew that they didn't have much time to get to the Grand Canyon. It was 6 hours from New Mexico, so they had Highway Patrol and state troopers in New Mexico out there on the roads trying to locate him before it was too late. And his apartment, they were carrying out the search warrant from top to bottom. They uncovered a collection of paperback books about death and other items that thought would be useful in the investigation, but they didn't turn up the 38 caliber weapon like one of them, like the one that was used on Megan and Cherish. They also reached out to the pastor of the Unity Church where Robert delivered the Sunday sermons. Her name was Reverend Julie Kane. She told detectives that Robert was fighting a battle within himself, a battle between his loving good part and the part of him that was angry and sick, and the sick side may have won. She described Robert as an articulate and bright graduate student at one time, but truly lacked focus and was merely playing at school just to find his way. That he was a good speaker, he had delivered really good messages, but he would also offer from serious, unexplained bouts of depression. Um, he would suffer from them. And he told her that he was about taking his own life at least twice. And he had been taking antipsychotic medication Prozac that had been used to treat his depression since was approved by the FDA back in 1987. However, it was linked to violent behavior and thoughts of self-inflicted harm at the time. It was still being evaluated by the FDA. If you have any personal experience or knowledge about Prozac, leave a comment, let me know. I do not, well, actually I do, but for the sake of this, I do not. But please leave in the comments if you feel so inclined. Um, at this point, they actually send out more bulletins nationwide. Manhunt begins the next morning, Saturday, May 16th at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Eastern Time. A call comes into the police station in New Mexico. And on the other side of the rest stop, the other line is a rest stop off of I-40 in New Mexico. It was a member of the Disabled Veterans Group, and they were doing a fundraiser out there, and they found a blue Plymouth car parked nearby with a lifeless man inside. When local officials arrived to investigate, they found alerted them to call the FDLE. The car had a Utah license plate, and that really didn't add up. But sure enough, when they run the plate, they discovered it had been reported stolen, along with one other license plate from a motel parking lot in Utah on May 8th. When officers approached the vehicle, they saw that the man looked deceased or passed out. The man was lying lifeless in the driver's seat and opened the door and noticed a handwritten note on the dashboard for whoever discovered his body. It read, cyanide poisoning by mouth. Do not try to resuscitate. Do not do mouth to mouth. It may poison you. Robert Rodriguez, and there were clear glass vial with a white substance tied around his neck with a leather strap like a necklace in the passenger seat was a brown folding notebook where Robert explained that he took cyanide to take his own life for the sake of the girl's parents' peace of mind and avoid prison time. The note went on to say that he mailed the letter. He mailed out a shitload of letters. Florida authorities addressed the special agent, Delbert McCarvey. This letter talked about him killing the two teenage girls. Um, I'm going to try to cut this down a little bit. He had also killed another girl, and this is where he had put her. And he said that if his urge became to where he would kill again, that he would take his own life. And that's what he did. Rodriguez did fingerprints, and this was later confirmed that the man, but they did not close this case yet because remembering they were expecting a letter that was going to be arriving. There was a total of 11 letters. He drank the mixture with scotch. The cyanide was scotch. He wrote letters to everybody under God's green earth. I'm trying to find where he talks about this one guy. His mother passed away on Easter Sunday. Well, anyway, this guy, this is part of the note. They actually used it to prove that he did it. This is one guy he was following after. That's the guy in the back of the car. An Assassin's Diary. And there again is some more of the note. I'm telling you, he wrote notes to everybody. It was just too much. Okay. So Robert called and confessed. By the next morning, he was found dead, but it couldn't happen anytime between 6 and call it 11 Eastern Standard Time. The individuals found him when Megan and Cherish's parents got the news. They were equally stunned. He had went to the bar and then he went down there and he had killed them. So there's a lot in there. Obsessed with killing. We wouldn't want to have to kill more than two people by now at this moment. She did know how close she was to the truth on Sunday, May 17th. Church members at the Unity Church gathered for the normal week sermon that Robert quickly delivered. They didn't know him as Robert. They thought that his name was Bob, which Bobby Robert something. Um, And he wasn't like the man they were reading about in the newspapers. He was, but described by people as close to him as gentle. He had a gentle soul. He was someone who helped others. I found this to be interesting and scary that someone could have two strikingly different personalities in one way and be so nice in one way and then be evil in another. Similarities on serial killers would be BTK, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy. They lived fairly normal lives. Many went to church and were church members, were crying, and they were trying to comfort one another. And it just didn't make sense to the women who recently been dating Bob, was sobbing uncontrollably. Um, her name was Joyce Humphreys. On Monday, May 18th, it was addressed to another letter come in to a reporter named Xavier Byron. This letter was the first of many that Robert had sent prior to taking his life. This is this one was intended to alert authorities to where his body would be because he was expecting them to find it in the Grand Canyon, but he didn't make it that far. And a one-page letter that began with new stuff. Here's a tip on good news story for you. And then it went on to read, by the time you receive this, I expected to be dead by cyanide, poisoning, or a gunshot. You'll find my body at the top of the hill and at the top of a large hill, which can be approached by Autodome, a dirt road in Cocaina. No, I don't know. I'm going with it. National Forest. The road is on the left, Highway 180, 30.8 miles from where 180 leaves Humphrey Street, and Flagstaff 22.7 miles past the last paved road on the left, the snow bowl going towards Grand Canyon. If for some reason this is not possible, I'll be in the rim of the Grand Canyon. My car is a 79 Plymouth Valere with stolen Utah license plates 183 FBR, and then it is said whether they know it or not, I am wanted for 3 murders by the Florida State Law Enforcement Agency. McGreevy would appreciate a phone call from you when you find the body. Fill in the details, and you may tell him that the third murder is a Valerie Hunt in 1984, and that he will receive full details on all 3 in the mail. Tell him to take the weekend off. I don't think that he can prove any of the 3, but I can't live with myself if I'm going to act like this. Thank you, Robert Rodriguez. 3 killings. That right 3. Wow. See how crazy this is. I told you I've never heard of a case like this. He just rambles sometimes. I mean, it's disturbing. Um, this before. So, of course, the media went crazy after the story came out. And third victim, Valerie Hunt, well, she was 22-year-old girl from Tallahassee Community College. She went to students. She was a student who disappeared in 1984. Her body was found that same September near a sinkhole near the pond off State Road 267 in Wakalala, don't know, County, Florida. Valerie Hunt worked for the Home and Land Publishing Corporation, and her supervisor described her as responsible and a valued employee, he told Tallahassee Democrat. And that is completely unlike Valerie to take off without notice from notice law enforcement searched the woods near the Lofton Pond and on horseback by helicopter. Valerie helicopter for Valerie's. The divers searched the ponds. They still couldn't locate her. She was a strong swimmer. So it would have been odd that she drowned. And then they finally found her. And so he was talking about how if he killed again, that he just needed to go on. He didn't want to. He didn't want to kill, and I guess the urge come up, and he did it. And so um, it's just sad because all these people died, and this man didn't really want to kill people. I guess you could say. Um, the fire. There was a fire. Let me see. Oh, he had trying to find my damn shoe. There was a fire and a 44-year-old at the time, and his body was found on the dining room floor near the back door. The fire seemed to be set purposely using an accelerant, and an autopsy was said to have been conducted, and that they were going to release the results. But I couldn't never find any more information about this. Megan's mom and dad lost both of their children. And that was the son that died in the fire. Um, their children, Clark left behind his wife Renee and a child named Taylor. Megan's mom Shirley passed in 2016. And this concludes it. I mean, it was long and just I don't know. It's wild. I just like to thank you so much for being here with me as always. These victims, you've given them your time, and I appreciate that you're listening. Be sure and hit the like button, subscribe, share, comment, complain, whatever you would like to do. It doesn't matter. Um, if I'm missing something, please add it to it. If you know anybody that needs any help or anything, be sure and maybe reach out to them regardless of the situation. I'd like to thank you so very much for watching. I will see you in my next video. And as always, thank you for coming, and I will talk to you later. Bye.